What's the most disturbing thing you've ever seen in the woods? I was on a solo backpacking trip in Montana, and I'd set up my hammock between two trees for the night. I was exhausted and fell asleep quickly. Around midnight, I woke up because my hammock was swaying, but there was no wind. I opened my eyes, and in the darkness, I could see a shape standing next to me. At first, I thought it might be a bear or a deer, but then I realized it was a person. They were standing maybe 2 feet away from my hammock, perfectly still, watching me sleep. I couldn't see their face. It was too dark, but I could make out their silhouette. I was completely paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do. If I moved, they'd know I was awake. If I screamed, I was miles from anyone who could help. So I just lay there, pretending to still be asleep, while this person stood over me, watching. After what felt like an eternity, they reached out and touched the hammock with one finger, making it sway again. Then they turned and walked away. I listened to their footsteps fade into the forest, and I didn't move for another hour. I just lay there, shaking. When the sun finally started to come up, I packed everything as quietly as I could and got out of there. I didn't make coffee. I didn't eat breakfast. I just left. I hiked 12 miles back to my car in record time, looking over my shoulder the entire way. When I got home, I found something in my backpack that I know wasn't there before. A Polaroid photo of me asleep in my hammock, taken from maybe 5 feet away. Whoever was there had a camera. They took a picture of me sleeping and put it in my bag without waking me. The photo is dark and grainy, but you can clearly see me in the hammock. And in the corner of the photo, you can see part of a face watching from the trees. I filed a police report, but they said without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I still have that photo. I keep it as a reminder to never hike alone again. My husband and I were hiking a remote trail in West Virginia when we both suddenly noticed something was wrong. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing, just absolute dead silence. We stopped walking and looked at each other, and I could tell he felt it too. Something wasn't right. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds in that unnatural quiet. Then we heard it. Footsteps, heavy footsteps, coming from multiple directions, like we were being surrounded. We couldn't see anyone. The trees were too dense, but we could hear them getting closer. My husband grabbed my hand and whispered, "We need to go, now." We started speed walking back the way we came, and the footsteps followed us, matching our pace. When we went faster, they went faster. We broke into a run, and I could hear them running too, crashing through the underbrush on both sides of the trail. I don't know what my husband saw, but at one point he looked back and his face went white. He just yelled, "Run," and we sprinted. We ran for probably 2 miles straight until we burst out onto a main road where there were other hikers and cars. The footsteps stopped the second we reached the road. We sat there gasping for air. I asked him what he saw. He said there were at least 4 of them, men dressed in camouflage, spread out in the trees, pacing us. He said one of them had a rifle. We reported it to the police, and they said it was probably hunters. But it wasn't hunting season, and we were on a trail where hunting isn't allowed. The police never investigated further. We asked other hikers if they'd experienced anything similar, and 2 other couples said yes, that they'd been followed on that same trail. One couple said they found their car vandalized when they got back to the trailhead. All 4 tires slashed. We never went back to that area. I was 15. My friends and I decided to go camping in the forest right behind my house. We'd been back there dozens of times. We knew those woods like the back of our hands. We set up camp near a small creek and spent the day just hiking and exploring. But as it started getting dark, things changed. We were sitting around the fire, just talking, when we heard something moving in the trees. It sounded big, heavy, like something with weight pushing through the underbrush. We grabbed our flashlights and swung them toward the noise, and that's when we saw it. Tucked between the trees was this makeshift shelter. It was a mess of branches, old tarps, and literal garbage. It definitely wasn't there 2 weeks ago when we last hiked through. Against our better judgment, we decided to check it out. As we got closer, we could see someone had been living there recently. There was a sleeping bag, food wrappers, empty water bottles. But it was the trees that made us run. Taped to the trunks all around the shelter were dozens of photographs. They were all of children. Kids playing at the park, kids walking home from school, riding bikes. All of them were taken from a distance. Sneaky. Like they didn't know they were being watched. And the worst part? Every photo was labeled with names and dates. Some of them went back years. We didn't touch a thing. We just bolted back to our campsite, grabbed our gear, and ran straight to my house. When the police investigated, they found things even more disturbing. This person wasn't just watching, they were documenting routines, schedules, routes home. They also found rope, zip ties, and duct tape. The police staked out the area for a while, but the person never came back. They must have seen us and abandoned the camp the second they realized they'd been found. To this day, the police never identified who it was. The case went cold. For months after that, the neighborhood lived in total vacuum of fear. No one let their kids walk anywhere alone. And me? I never set foot in those woods again. When I was in college, I went on a solo hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. I'd been hiking for about 6 hours and was pretty deep into the woods when I came across an old, abandoned cabin. It was small, maybe one room, and the roof was half collapsed. I've always been curious about abandoned places, so I decided to check it out. The door was hanging off its hinges. Inside, it was dark and smelled like mold and decay. I used my phone's flashlight to look around and immediately wished I hadn't. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges in the wood, like someone had been clawing at them, trying to get out. In the corner, there was a pile of clothes, all women's clothes, dresses, blouses, shoes. They were old and rotting, but you could still tell what they were. On a table in the center of the room, there was a journal. I know I shouldn't have, but I opened it and started reading. The entries were from the 1970s, written by a woman who said she'd been taken. She wrote about being kept in the cabin, about someone bringing her food, about how she'd tried to escape, but couldn't. The entries went on for months, and they became more and more desperate. She wrote about hearing other women in the woods at night, calling for help. She wrote about scratching at the walls until her fingers bled. The last entry just said, "He's coming back. I have to try again." And then, nothing. I took photos of the journal and got out of there as fast as I could. When I got back to civilization, I reported it to the police. They investigated and confirmed that the cabin had been used to hold someone against their will. They found evidence that multiple women had been there over the years, but the case was decades old. They never identified the victims, and they never found the person responsible. I still have nightmares about that journal, about the scratches on the walls, about what happened to those women. I used to work as a park ranger in a national forest in Oregon. One day, I was doing a routine patrol on one of the more remote trails when I came across something that still haunts me. There was a circle of trees, maybe 20 feet in diameter. In the center was a pile of dead animals, deer, rabbits, birds, squirrels, all arranged in a neat spiral pattern. They weren't rotting yet, so they had to be fresh, maybe a day or two old. What made it even more disturbing was the way they were positioned. Each animal had been carefully placed on its back, with its legs crossed over its chest, almost like they were laid out in tiny caskets. There were no signs of how they died, no blood, no wounds, nothing. They just looked like they'd been placed there deliberately. I called it in immediately, and wildlife officials came out to investigate. They confirmed that all the animals had died around the same time, but they couldn't determine the cause of death. There were no signs of poison, disease, or physical trauma. The leading theory was carbon monoxide poisoning from some kind of leak, but we never found a source. We set up cameras in the area to see if whoever did this would come back. 3 days later, we caught something on film. Around 2 in the morning, a person dressed entirely in black, including a mask, walked into the clearing. They stood in the center of the circle of dead animals for almost 30 minutes, completely motionless, just standing there. Then they turned around and left. We tried to track them, but the trail went cold. They'd parked on a service road miles away, and we couldn't get a license plate number. What really disturbed me was that this didn't just happen once. It happened 3 more times over the next few months, always in different locations, always the same pattern, a circle of trees, dead animals posed in a spiral. someone returning in the middle of the night to stand among them. We never caught whoever it was. Eventually, the incident stopped, but I still think about it all the time. What kind of person does something like that, and why? I was camping alone in the Cascades, and around 2 in the morning, I woke up because I heard breathing outside my tent. Not animal breathing, human breathing, slow and deliberate, like someone was standing right next to the tent wall. I froze completely. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just lay there listening. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. I could hear them shifting their weight, the fabric of my tent moving slightly as they leaned closer. At one point, I saw a shadow pass across the tent wall, blocking the moonlight. Someone was circling my tent. I had my knife in my hand, but I knew that if someone wanted to get in, a tent offers zero protection. It's just fabric. I waited. Eventually, the breathing stopped. The footsteps moved away. I stayed completely still until sunrise, too terrified to even check if they were gone. When I finally got the courage to unzip my tent and look outside, there were footprints in the dirt all around my tent. Multiple sets. More than one person had been out there. But what made my blood run cold was this. The footprints came from the woods, stopped at my tent, circled it multiple times, and then just ended. There was no trail leading back into the trees. It was like whoever, or whatever it was, had simply vanished. I packed up my gear in under 5 minutes and hiked back to my car. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time, expecting to see someone following me. When I reported it to the park rangers, they said there had been other reports of someone stalking solo campers in that area. They increased patrols, but never found anyone. I'll never camp alone again. That feeling of being completely vulnerable, with only a thin piece of fabric between you and someone who means you harm, that's a kind of terror I can't describe. I'm an avid trail runner, and I run in a large forest preserve near my house several times a week. One morning, I was about 5 miles into my run when I noticed something off the trail. It looked like a pile of clothes, so I went to investigate. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just clothes. There was a sleeping bag, a backpack, and some camping gear, all arranged neatly, like someone had set up camp and then just disappeared. What made it disturbing was that everything was still there. The backpack was full of supplies. The sleeping bag was zipped up, like someone had just gotten out of it. There was even a half-eaten sandwich sitting in a container. I called out, thinking maybe the person was nearby, but there was no response. I opened the backpack to see if there was any ID inside, and that's when I found the photos. There were dozens of printed photos of me running on this trail. They had been taken from a distance, hidden in the trees, and they were dated. The dates went back months. Someone had been watching me, photographing me. Every time I ran here, I felt sick. I called the police immediately, and they came to investigate. They collected everything as evidence and told me they'd look into it, but they never found who it belonged to. The police told me to change my running route and to never run alone. I started carrying pepper spray, and now I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if whoever was taking those photos is still out there, watching me. When I was 19, I went backpacking with 2 friends in the Sierra Nevada mountains. We'd been hiking for 3 days and were pretty far from any civilization. On our last night, we made camp near a stream and were sitting around the fire when we heard singing. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it slowly grew louder. It sounded like a woman's voice, singing a lullaby. We followed the sound and found a woman sitting on a rock by the stream. She looked like she was in her 60s or 70s. She was wearing a nightgown and no shoes, just sitting there in the cold, quietly singing. We asked if she was okay. She turned to look at us and smiled. Then she said, "I'm waiting for them to come back." We asked who she meant, and she said, "My children. They went swimming and they haven't come back yet." We tried to explain that there was no one else around, that she was alone, and that we needed to get her some help. But she insisted her children were in the water, and that she needed to wait for them. One of my friends hiked back to get cell service and called for help, while the rest of us stayed with the woman. She kept singing, softly, and staring at the water the entire time. When search and rescue finally arrived, they recognized her immediately. She was a woman who had gone missing from a care facility about 30 miles away, 3 days earlier. She had dementia and had wandered off, The most disturbing part came later, when we talked to the rescue team. They told us that 40 years earlier, this woman's 2 children had drowned in a lake near where we found her. She had been there the day they drowned and had never fully recovered mentally. Somehow, she had made her way back to a body of water and was reliving that day, waiting for her children to come back from swimming. I work as a wildlife photographer, and I spend a lot of time alone in remote forests, trying to get shots of animals. One afternoon, I was in the Olympic National Forest, setting up my camera near a game trail, when I noticed something unusual. There was a tent set up about 50 yards away, partially hidden by trees. At first, I assumed it was just another camper, but something about it felt wrong. The tent was perfectly still, no movement, no sound, and it had been set up in a strange spot, not near any trails or clearings. I watched it through my telephoto lens for about 20 minutes and didn't see any activity. Eventually, I decided to check it out, just to make sure whoever was camping there was okay. As I got closer, I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" There was no response. I unzipped the tent and looked inside. There was a person in a sleeping bag, facing away from the entrance. I said, "Hey, are you okay?" They didn't move. I reached out to shake them, and that's when I realized something was very wrong. The sleeping bag was too stiff. I pulled it back, and inside was a mannequin, dressed in full camping gear, jacket, boots, the whole thing. But that wasn't the worst part. In the corner of the tent, there was a camera set up on a tripod, pointed directly at the entrance. It was recording. I got out of there immediately and called the police. They retrieved the camera, and when they reviewed the footage, it showed me, and dozens of other hikers and campers, who had come to investigate the tent over the past few weeks. Whoever set it up had been baiting people to come check on the tent, just so they could film them. The police never figured out who did it or why, but I think about it every time I'm alone in the woods now.